I leave on Tuesday to go to New York. Yeah.
Here you go, love. And that one, please.
What do you need help?
Oh, be careful.
Oh, Lord.
Braver than I. Ever since my injury, I do not.
See, in my classroom, I had a string, so I didn't.
Yeah, what? There used to be one. It broke?
We're gonna get one.
Okay.
Pink one, please.
Oh, yeah. So I'm not blinded. While blocking the view. Okay. Okay. I'm the host. Fantastic. Look at us. We are getting it right the first time. Yes. Hi, guys. Can those of you at home hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. My hero. Today we're going to talk about disclosures. Sorry, starting a couple minutes late. I always think I can manage so much. Nothing of high quality comes quickly. So disclosures are a huge part of our job. There are disclosures that come by reports and third parties. There's firsthand knowledge disclosures by sellers. There's also agent disclosure, right? There are very strict rules in relation to disclosure. When in doubt, you should be disclosing. There are blanket requirements of disclosure, okay? So even if there's not a specific question on disclosure documents, there are blanket questions such as, is there any other known fact, okay, known fact or condition that may potentially affect value or desirability of the property? That's pretty all-encompassing and blanket. So when in doubt, we should disclose. Now, there is also a question as to when to disclose, how much and what, okay? So when you have a property on the market and you have a major issue, it may be advantageous to inspect or gather information and disclose, pre-disclose to the buyer, okay? Because most buyers will care about it. It will very likely result in a credit request, which could be pre-negotiated and included in offer price. And this would be advantageous to your sellers because entering escrow and canceling is far worse, okay? A lot of times than pre-disclosing and negotiating up front. And this is because of days in market and the kind of stigma that buyers have in relation to property that falls out of escrow. There are also less significant items, but that have potentially high dollar tags attached to them that if they're pre-disclosed might circumvent a seller having to make a negotiation in relation to an item like that at all. And I'll give you a very, very clear and common example. Fireplaces. They're almost never in perfectly safe operating condition, okay? There's a difference between a fireplace that's causing a structural hazard that could potentially harm people as well as the structure of the home. And a fireplace that needs some work and really shouldn't be run or used daily until, cracks are sealed and extra safety measures or upgrades are put into play. Okay, if you are a listing agent and you advise your seller to disclose this up front, that the fireplace is decorative only, okay, you make sure everyone's aware of it and clear, it's part of your contract. Well, a buyer doesn't have a way, or they shouldn't have any place or position from which to ask for credit or repair to it, unless they do an inspection and there's something other than it's just not operable, such as the structural issue I shared. And this is advantageous because it protects your seller's purchase price. It also keeps from having difficult negotiations and helps you to focus on other things. How many buyers would not purchase a home because the fireplace is not operable? Probably not many of them if they live the home otherwise, right? But they become very focused on things like this and very adamant in wanting large credits or repairs in the case that nothing is shared. The property is not marketed in a way that protects the seller's purchase price. It becomes a request. Chimney repairs are often very pricey. And there are two major reasons that home purchases are canceled: generally financing or inspection negotiation related issues. Okay, so there's some things you can get away with and are advantageous as a listing agent and seller to pre-disclose. Some things that are just issues that everyone expects to handle. Also, if a seller has any estimates or reports from their previous purchase or from an escrow that cancels, they are required to share that with any new buyers. Okay, and this is even reports, estimates, or inspections that we don't believe to be accurate or coming from people qualified to provide that information. Okay, so let's say you have a listing, you end up in escrow, and the buyer's uncle, who's a contractor, comes and says there's a major problem with the foundation that will cost roughly $100,000 to repair. Perhaps this uncle is not a licensed contractor at all. You can't find a license number. Do you still have to share this report or estimate, this information with a new potential buyer if you cancel this escrow? Yes, you do. So in this case, right, you can share your opinion of it, why you think that estimate or report, that information is not valid, but it's also probably really advantageous to hire at the seller's cost, which is unusual, your own independent inspector from someone who is licensed and qualified to provide information in that area, to dispute what you believe to be an inaccurate or even completely fraudulent report, right? And encourage the buyer to have their own. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're hoping to avoid cancellation, okay? And we are protecting our clients from liability on the seller end, and we are performing our duties as legally required. And on the buyer's end, we are encouraging them to inspect so they feel confident with the information they have, so they can make a good decision and make an educated and reasonable request that is hopefully received well and accepted so that we can continue on with the sale, or so that the buyer can very clearly, as quickly as possible, realize that this is not the home for them. They don't have the time or energy to undertake this repair. If we can't negotiate that it's handled prior to close of escrow, so that we can cancel and move on and allow the sellers to do their thing and get the buyer into escrow and hopefully the right home. Okay, so let's talk about agent disclosure for a moment, right? If you, the agent, notice anything or are aware of anything, even if you're not qualified to know what that thing is, well, it should be disclosed in some way. The most common place to disclose it would be on what's called the Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure, also referred to as AVID, one of the most hated documents in all of real estate by real estate sales agents. Okay, so what this document is, let me back it up. This is one of the only things that really an agent discloses. Let me tell you why this document and this requirement came to be a law and a requirement. there was a home in Northern California in the Palo Alto area. Okay. Buyer had inspection, sale went as it should, inspectors found nothing wrong, sale closed. A couple months later, middle of the night, everyone inside is sleeping. The house falls off the side of the hill that it's on, and everyone inside the home dies. Everyone was horrified and very honest and helpful. After extensive depositions and statements and research, the only thing that came about is the buyer's agent, or I can't remember, buyer or listing agent, they noticed that a 2x4 on the elevated back porch, the steps down from like the kitchen, one of them, was like kind of bent or off a little bit, was leaning, right? And so everyone got together and said, it is not an agent's job to be an inspector, right? We're not an inspector, we're not an architect, we're not a contractor. However, we want to avoid the situation from ever possibly happening. So how can we do that? So the state came up with the mostly reasonable requirement that as an agent, it is our job to look at everything to the best of our ability, not to open things and dig through them, okay, but to look at it and disclose anything, even if we don't know what it is, that could be off, because it at least gives the buyer and seller the opportunity to check it out. So this agent visual inspection disclosure, especially if you have a home with a lot of issues, it can be lengthy and time consuming. It is a requirement. If I'm the listing agent, I typically do this before I enter escrow. If I'm the buyer's agent, I do it the very first time I enter the property after the offer is accepted. That's typically during my inspections. It can be uncomfortable because you're picking a place apart. So I often tell this story about why this is required, why it's a good thing for everyone. And then I'm basically going to be nitpicking. I often am citing like marks and stains on wall, crack in the ceiling. I don't say how many. I don't comment on if I think it's severe or large or small. I don't guess. So if I see discoloration and it looks like need to mold, I don't know that it's mold, right? So what I'll say is a mark of discoloration on the north wall of the master bedroom, something like that, okay? What I'm doing is I'm telling people what I see without guessing and without defining what's severe, what's large, what's small. I'm giving everyone the opportunity to inspect anything that I report on and decide that for themselves, because I'm not an inspector. I'm not testing what's there. I am simply pointing out anything that could possibly be a flaw, whether it's cosmetic or could be potentially caused by something else. That's not up to me to decide. If I'm not able to see a large area, I even need to report that. So, most commonly, a room might have a large area rug. And so in my inspection, in my agent visual inspection disclosure, I will be commenting that there's a large area rug covering much of the living room floor. Okay. I think most commonly I'm saying there's smudges or marks on paint, cracks in places, scuffs or scratches on floors, discoloration and grout. Most of the time it's fairly simple stuff, but I might see that an outlet plate is missing. I need to comment on these things as well. Sometimes I need to comment on something, but I don't know what it is. So I do my best. I am, in this instance, as if I'm explaining something to a 5-year-old, right? I'm breaking down what I need to describe in an easy way. There is let's say I don't know what a faceplate is, the covering for the outlet, right? Or let's say I don't know the name of what's referred to as chair rail. That's like crayon molding, except it's in the middle of the room, often more for decorative purposes. I will say, I'd say molding, or, the decorative carpentry in the middle of the wall in the dining room, right? I break it down into simple terms if I don't understand what I'm looking at, but I see a defect in it. Like maybe I see a visible seam, okay? Or I see that a large piece of the material is gouged out. I would say like gouge or damage to molding at middle of the wall in dining room, right? I'm just breaking it down in simple terms. So that's the purpose of that. As an agent, what you need to disclose yourself, that's probably the biggest amount of what you need to know. What about things that should be disclosed, but aren't physical condition. I do have a duty to disclose that as well if I know about it. Something like Melrose taxes. Melrose taxes are not super common in LA. However, they are very common in the Playa area. They happen when a city and its population far outgrow the existing public services like police, schools, hospitals. Ultimately, it's imposed upon property taxes as a special Melrose tax of a certain amount for a certain specified amount of time for whoever owns the home. Okay, and these can be really significant costs. And sometimes a certain area only has, 2 more years before they don't have to pay this Melrose tax anymore. Some of them have 10, 20. So you can find this out from a title professional. Be aware of this. This is a reason why it's great to check with a title professional about a listing or a buyer sale and ask them if there's anything that you need to know. But remember, not all of them are looking for everything all of the time. So you can ask these questions specifically until you're super familiar with the area, and the title rep might think you're very green, but explain that and just say, hey, is there anything affecting title like Melrose taxes that I need to know about? For example, I know that's not super common, but I knew. This is also going to be important to disclose up front if you have a listing, so that you're not receiving and accepting offers for buyers and agents. These common occurrences in those general areas, right? Because this is something, once a buyer learns this, might either make them not want to purchase the property anymore, and they'd be able to cancel under their contingency protections, okay? Or failure to disclose, well, that's liability to seller and agents, okay? Or maybe they are not capable of making that additional payment and still purchasing that property, okay? I talked about what should be disclosed upfront and not upfront. Well, do I need to go around and tell people about every single little flaw in a home, like the faceplate missing, if I'm the listing agent prior to an offer being received? Probably not. Just big, important things that affect a buyer financially or their ability to obtain a loan. This is not just for the buyer's advantage, it's also for the seller's advantage, right? If you think that this issue, right, you're exercising judgment, if you think that this issue could potentially cause a buyer to reconsider the purchase, it's probably something significant enough that should be disclosed up front. Also, if it's important to your client, they want to take all the chandeliers in the house. That's not even a disclosure. That's an inclusion and exclusion, but you're disclosing the preference of the seller, right? So that a buyer knows to expect that, and their agent knows that they should be asking their client if they want to go ahead and write their offer that way, so that it doesn't become a dispute after the fact, even though it's already covered in the contract. If there's any contingencies left and it leads to bad feelings or bad blood, it could result in a cancellation, right? So just important things. Let's see, disclosure, agent disclosure. So yeah, I mean, you're not trying to not sell the home, but you want to make sure that the home is sold in good faith with anything considerable out there. Sometimes I go to take a listing and I notice an issue. Maybe I see a ton of cracks in the pavement, unevenness in floors and walls. I might advise my seller, or even make the choice as an agent, a self-employed business owner, that I don't necessarily want to list the home for the seller unless we find out what's going on here, because I know that a repair like that can be significant and of significant cost, right? Very likely to be observed and mandatorily disclosed by at least me in disclosures, right? And I have to advise my seller that they should be disclosing that as well, because I know about it in their seller disclosures. Buyer's probably going to inspect it, right? And they may not be able to purchase the home anymore. Maybe they can't get a loan because it's such a significant repair that it makes the property not lendable. Maybe it costs too much that the seller doesn't even want to sell anymore because they need more equity out of their sale in order to move on to what their future plans are, that kind of thing. So I'll advise the seller, let's find out what's there. At least we'll know what we're working with. And we will know that whoever we hired is very likely giving us, or at least hopefully, unbiased information, right? It's not a buyer's inspector going in there trying to trump up the cost to try to get a better negotiation on credit or repair. Not that they should be doing that or necessarily would, but hey, just like everyone else, not everyone is ethical and does things correctly, right? So how can we do our best to avoid that circumstance is to try to get information up front with that we can trust from a reputable source, usually based on agent referral. And maybe it's something that the seller wants to just take care of and fix so it doesn't become a negotiation point, and provide documentation that the repair has been done and or any warranty that might be associated with the work. So that can all be provided and shown that it was handled correctly up front and doesn't become an issue. So there are also disclosures that are brokerage issues. Every brokerage has their own. Their legal team creates them, and then our brokerage provides them to us, although it's not necessarily all that easy to find. You can get them from our transaction coordinator, Brian Chung, whether you use him or not. Pretty sure there's a Google Drive somewhere where they're located as well. Should probably get a copy of those. A lot of them as well don't even apply to all transactions. They're kind of blanket disclosures, and they mirror a lot of the information in the state required disclosures, okay, that we get off of zip forms. And so it's very repetitive. And if I am listing a property, I like these prior to going to market so that I might learn the information that we just discussed that could potentially affect the sales price, the ability to close. Also, I want to protect my time. The seller's not willing to, if the seller is not willing to acknowledge a problem, perhaps I do not want to list that home because very likely I believe that this is going to result in cancellations. And if the seller is unwilling to even investigate what that issue is, well, they're very unlikely to be reasonable when it comes time to negotiate it, right? And it's less likely I'm going to get reliable information and be able to control the situation and close. I'm not doing a service to the seller or myself and my investment time and dollar as far as advertisement photos, all that kind of stuff. Yes.
Examples of a brokerage disclosures.
I have copies of our brokerage disclosures they'll go over the same things that our regular disclosures do, like smoke detectors, carbon monoxide, water heater strapping. But there's also some local ones, like local ordinances in relation to, reduced square footage or special overlay zones where there's a committee to have permits to build in certain areas. It's not just LA Department of Building and Safety. There's like Mulholland Scenic has more regulations on heights, blocking people's view, that kind of thing. Even the Metro line going in is on a local area disclosure that our brokerage has created, right? A lot of them have, it just covers all the different areas and what's going on. Some of them are even outdated, but whatever it is, what it is, better to just have a blanket disclosure and try to avoid lawsuits. There may be things going on also that could really affect material value that you yourself as the agent are not aware of, nor is the homeowner, right? So we have what's called errors and omissions insurance, E&O policy, right? An error is an error, no criminal act, no attempt to conceal. Okay, omissions, right? You omitted something. That is with intent. Are we liable for errors? That's up to the court, right? So our brokerage steps in and tries to limit that liability by covering more bases, triple covering, secondarily wording subjects that we already have covered in our state disclosures. And city requirements, as far as transfer requirements, what I mean is like a prerequisite to close a sale can differ city to city. We have state requirements that are blanket, but for instance, City of Los Angeles, most commonly, we have what's referred to as a 9A building report, a city building report that's required, and a retrofitting certificate of compliance, which covers, retrofitting is a blanket term for bringing something from what used to be code, which is still legally passable in most instances, to what's current code. However, the city has decided some of them should not be optional, such as, let's see, state doesn't require this, but City of LA requires automatic gas shut-off valves on all gas lines, like all main gas lines. So that's just one example. And we don't necessarily always know what those are, right? And technically they're seller responsibility, but these disclosures give us the opportunity to read, decide if any of these things apply. If you do them before you put it on the MLS, you're going to avoid potential issues. Yes.
Retrofitting only for homes or for units?
Both.
Both?
Mhm. Mhm.
You have to be the retrofitter to give you a report or?
Yes, sir. At least on residential, you can have anything 4 units or under. That's multifamily. You still need to have retrofitting. Oh, and by the way, if you're selling units, you need an AVID, that agent visual inspection disclosure, for every single unit. It is super annoying and it will take forever and the tenants will be hovering over you. It will be uncomfortable, but it's required and it's very important.
Is retrofitting only even in the one floor, you still need a retrofitting?
Yes, I think what you're referring to is, I think it's called a soft story retrofit, and it has to do with buildings of a certain height. That's more like apartments and HOA complexes. I'm not really aware of what that is, but that's a mandatory requirement between the complex or homeowner and the state. That is not a real estate agent related requirement.
So that's something the seller has to obtain from the city?
I don't know what the regulations are. The only time I've had experience with the soft story retrofit requirement was in the Valley. My buyer was considering making an offer on a condo in an HOA complex that didn't have that resolved yet. I don't know what the requirements are or the deadlines. I think it's probably a case-by-case basis, sometimes not required.
City will let the homeowner know,
Mhm,
this is a condition,
mhm.
and they give them a certain time frame,
Got it,
and they have to.
got it. Okay. How did the city let you know? Was it on a building report or title?
They inspected right after the earthquake,
Yes,
they inspected.
the Northridge quake.
For
yeah.
that time period built up, and they realized that a lot of them fell because of the
Right.
supports. that
But
they
what if
had.
the seller didn't know and the listing agent didn't know?
Seller will know, because city has sent them a letter.
What if the daughter inherits a home? That seller might not know. I'm sure it's publicly recorded somewhere.
Yes.
Maybe you don't know the answer to that. My guess is it would be recorded on title.
Yes.
Yes,
I know like an agent like here in Robert's team has a listing, let's say in Adams Boulevard, that's an old situation built in 1924. Do those, does she get
I-
involved with the retrofitting or? she-
I don't think so, but I don't know. You'd have to check with the city and I'd call a title rep and ask. I talked to escrow. Even if it was a requirement, it's probably negotiable. As long as it's done by the deadline and you negotiate in your contract who's going to handle payment for it and getting it done, as long as it meets the city requirements, but you'd have to check with the city. Generally speaking, if something like that big is required, it is going to be recorded on the preliminary title report. It is our job as agents to read HOA docs and preliminary title reports, even though we don't understand them. So if you don't understand them, who's going to help you with the title report? Title.
Right.
Also, there are hyperlinks on the items in a title report. A lot of them are normal, but something like that, that's not. You can click on it and it will have the document in relation to it. It's called an underlying document. And it will generally say who issued this document. And you can generally reach out to that department directly. If it's a city, you're going to get the runaround, but you do have to put in the time. You're going to get the runaround, but you can call this department. You should, if you are diligent and stubborn enough, eventually end up talking to someone who can tell you what is necessary. Yes,
Do you look as an agent, do you go for permit reports just?
I do not, unless, so the question in the classroom was, as a listing agent, do I pull permits? I do not pull permits unless I have reason to believe that there may be space that is reported erroneously, either as permitted or unpermitted. And from the information I have, looks like there's a discrepancy to me. Property records are not always accurate. I might hire a third-party professional to give me square footage plans so that I can take the liability off the seller. But ultimately, the biggest question is, no matter what the square footage is there, a potential buyer is going to want to know, is that additional square footage permitted or not? In that case, I'll ask the seller. It is a question on the seller disclosure. Perhaps they know. Perhaps they don't, because maybe that addition or change was made prior to their ownership. If I'm really concerned about the issue, I will go into, if it's City of Los Angeles, not always, but sometimes I can find it myself at the website ladbs.org, Los Angeles Department of Building and Safety.org. But not always, especially if it happened a long time ago. Those records weren't electronic until quite some time, or fairly recently. And sometimes even the permits, it'll say something like in relation to addition, but it won't tell you where or what. It's not always clear. So yes, there are third-party people who can pull permits to inspect for you. It'd be probably pretty hard always to interpret yourself, however. So if I'm concerned about it, I'll recommend to the seller that we pull that permit report. It doesn't usually cost much money. Like you hire someone, just a woman named Wendy Calhoun that I would hire if I need permit help. It's WENDI Calhoun. I don't know. You can Google her. You can ask other agents in the office. I'm sure I have her phone number in my phone or on my computer or something. No, she just goes down and pulls permits. And here's the thing, I've actually hired her to pull permits and she didn't, I ended up knowing eventually, like she didn't pull them all. And so she had to go back down and get them, right? So you still have to make a disclaimer. I know this person, she's the only person I know of. I worked with her many times, but you probably have to make that disclaimer. But there's been one time that I know of that she didn't end up getting me the permit I needed. I caught it. The client was fully aware that it existed. We just didn't have it, thankfully. So I sent her back down and she got it for me. So, right. So I can tell the seller, but it doesn't mean it's 100% accurate. And I can often, if I think it's a big enough problem, I'll tell the seller, let's try to get that before we go on the market. If I think it's a small issue, then I'll probably recommend to the buyer's agent and I'll disclose, property or the square footage on property records differs from actual square footage as provided by whatever floor plan drawing company I had the seller hire to get that square footage. Buyer and buyer's agent are hereby informed that they should perform their own diligence in order to satisfy themselves with that square footage discrepancy, right? But that gives me a possible problem where the escrow might cancel. Not good for my client, not good for me, right? So it's a matter of judgment, and it's ultimately up to my client, the seller, if they want to preemptively handle it or if they want to just make the disclaimer and put it on the buyer. If it's 20 feet, nobody probably cares. If it is quite a bit or it's unpermitted space, that could potentially cause a loan issue for the buyer. The appraiser, if they know about unpermitted square footage, they won't calculate it into the value of the home, and so the property might not appraise. Or if it's a big enough issue, if the city comes out because the buyer pulls a permit for anything else, or there's any reason for the city to look into it, even though there isn't usually, they don't go looking for this stuff. Technically, the city can come and say to the buyer, demolish and repair that immediately at their cost. Doesn't matter if they did it or not. Okay, so and technically, permits are required for all work, I think over $600 or $700. People don't pull permits for work like that, right? And ultimately it's up to a buyer about their comfort level, but really we want to make sure structural things with gas lines, water lines, these can cause major potential problems, safety hazards, right? We want to make sure that they were done correctly, and that's why we do it with permit. We want to make sure a licensed person who was supervised by the city comes and checks on the status to make sure the work goes as it should throughout the process. But the city inspectors can be misled, deceived, lazy, I'm sure at times bribed. So you can't always 100% rely on that, but we're supposed to be able to, and that is the purpose of permits, is to protect everyone. And even like neighboring properties. What's it, that model, her dad, the developer, what is it, Hadid? Gigi Hadid's dad? That's her name, right? He built some house up in the hills above other homes, all unpermitted. The city cited him. He didn't fix it. It went to court. He was court ordered to tear the entire structure down. Why? Well, it wasn't built structurally sound, so all of the homes beneath it and around it could have been affected, right? It can be a major issue. You know, to put in things like pools or additional structures, you might need grading, retaining walls, you know, walls that are above and underneath ground to hold dirt in place if you're going to alter structure and weight. So it can be a big issue, or, you know, technically, I replaced my kitchen sink. Okay, where I'm not moving the plumbing, I'm simply changing the actual container, the way it looks, right? If that costs me over $600, it should be permanent. Do you think anyone really cares about that? Probably not, right? Probably not. But they might care if I added a washer and dryer on my second floor. I had a handyman do it, it wasn't done right, and then there was a massive leak. But I failed to disclose that. I failed to pull a permit. Now the buyer has legal recourse if I didn't disclose that change and the fact that it was done without permits. That is a question in the disclosures. Okay. Yes.
When they city, talking about LEDBS.
All cities have building departments. If you're in an unincorporated area of LA, which is not a concept I'm willing to explain at the moment, there's even like a county LA building department. So they provide permits and they sign off on them. Okay. All right. So let's move on and let's actually look at in the seller disclosures, the ones that are provided by the state. We're going to only look at the two most important. Okay, there are two that are far more important than everything else. Okay, we will briefly browse through the rest. Again, get this, you'll need to know what disclosures are required. Some of them are conditionally required depending upon when the property was built and the type of property. We'll talk about that a little bit. I'm going to show you in KW Command where you can get an up-to-date checklist that tells you what is required by the office, which ones are conditional. So at least you have to look at it and think, oh, does this apply to my sale, right? Whether I'm the buyer's agent or the listing agent, because from the buyer's agent, it's a seller disclosure. If I don't get it, is it my responsibility to ask for it? 100%. Okay, so if you're using a transaction coordinator who's not super detail oriented or great, or even just too busy, and they miss something, who hired that person? You did. Do you have liability in the fact that that document's missing and it somehow affected your client? Yes, you do. Okay, so even if you're using a TC, you should still go through, take a look. You should be looking through them anyways and presenting them to your client. Okay, so at a bare minimum, you should check that they're all there. And remind yourself to check for the ones that are conditional that may or may not need to be there. All right, let's see. Oh, I'm too loud for you at home? I don't know how to fix that, sorry, so.
Yeah,
I guess turn down your volume.
it's because the mic is like too close to like your mouth, so like it's blowing up.
Oh, how about that? Is that better?
Oh yeah, that's way better.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
And just in the future, I don't really monitor chat when I'm teaching, so feel free to speak up.
Yeah, no problem.
Help you out sooner, and you don't
Yeah,
have to.
I just didn't want to cut you off. That was it.
Please, I'm here to teach you guys, and you guys being able to hear me and be comfortable is really important to that. So feel free at any time to interrupt me.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Share screen. All right, can everyone at home see these disclosures? Disclosure information advisory.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so this is not a big or important one. It talks more about, and this is a fantastic document for you to read as a new agent and before doing disclosures or reviewing disclosures with your buyers or sellers. Disclosure information advisory. Okay, it says it's for sellers, but this is really important. It tells you what's required, why, what to consider, how to interpret what you're reading, and what to do if you have questions or want to know more. It talks about whose responsibility that is. Instructions, right? So you can't leave any documents blank, and I'll talk to you more about that. There are several reasons for that. If anything is disclosed after a buyer's lifted their investigation contingency, technically the buyer has 5 additional days. Their investigation contingency is reintroduced into the transaction. Okay, so this can be done by accident, purposefully, or something new can arise. So for instance, I had a listing, it was an escrow, it was a longer escrow. We had unusually heavy rain for about a week. All of a sudden, the garage roof started leaking pretty heavily. I had to disclose that new information after all the contingencies were lifted. So technically the buyer could have canceled for any reason that they wanted to within that 5-day time frame. And of course, we had to mitigate and negotiate repairs to the seller obviously wanted to protect their asset and the buyer their future purchase. But we had to make sure everyone was okay with the repairs, the way we handled them, and that everyone was comfortable that they had been repaired properly. It puts us in a really weird spot because there's no pre-agreement as to how or what shall be done. So it's a negotiate as you go, and it's really a good faith cooperation. What's the word I'm looking for? Endeavor. Okay, so this disclosure information advisory, super important and very informative. Okay. Goes over some of the documents that are required. And it goes over the 2 most important ones, which we'll look at length, the real estate transfer disclosure statement or TDS and SPQ, seller property questionnaire. Okay. There's something called an exempt seller disclosure. So a TDS, that document transfer disclosure statement, has a lot of really detailed questions. Okay, it would be very difficult for someone who's never been in or seen the home, and that's rare, but it does happen, right? Maybe someone in another state inherits their grandparents' home. Maybe they have been in it, but not for 20 years. They don't know what, other than the pictures their agent shared with them, they don't know much about it. Okay. Sometimes court ordered or trustee sales, basically where the seller is expected to have very limited or no knowledge of the condition of the home. They may actually qualify to fill out what's referred to as an exempt seller disclosure, ESD, instead of the TDS. But that is not for you to decide. Only an attorney that may be involved in the transaction can instruct you to do so. Or if you think that this document may qualify, you'll need to see Michael Rosales, share the circumstances with him, and you'll probably want to draft an email, something in writing, having the client, the seller, confirm to you that yes, they do meet all of this criteria. Okay.
What is the name?
Exempt seller disclosure. It's rare, but it does happen. Okay. So, real estate transfer disclosure statement. If I'm the listing agent, I like to review these again with my client because I'm a good listing agent and I want to close my deals. I don't want to work for free. I don't want to set anyone up for failure. I don't want to hurt my seller. I'm going to fill these out before I go on the market so that I know what I'm doing and I do whatever I need to do to better situate us or allow the seller to fix, repair, get their next moments in life in order so that they are ready to prepare with the ramification that this issue might possibly have. I do it in their home so that if we don't know what we're talking about, we don't know what the terminology is, they can point to it and show me and we can figure it out. As an agent, you are not to tell them what to write on here, although I have no problem giving examples or, Googling or maybe having a contractor or someone who does know something come and tell them. I cannot physically write or type these documents out for them, even if I am typing verbatim what they tell me to write on here. It is completely illegal. And if you do so and you are caught, you can lose your license permanently, as you should. Right? This is one of the most important documents, informationally speaking, from seller to buyer there is. So I can't tell them what to write. I can give them examples. I can help them find information where they can make better decisions. I can guide them in the instructions. Okay, so my instructions to my sellers when we're completing these documents, hopefully in person, hopefully at the property, if not at least over the phone, is that they should disclose anything and everything that they think, that they know about, and that they think could affect desirability or value of the property. Okay, that they're not to guess or make conjecture. So very similar to me doing my agent visual inspection disclosure. If they say, oh, I think that there's mold, it kind of looks like it, you know, at the exterior porch above the eaves. Oh, did you have a mold inspector come out? No. Why do you think it's mold? It just kind of looks like it. I'm not sure. I want you to disclose that there's some discoloration. You know, I want you to disclose what's there, but we can be liable if we say something and it's wrong, even if it's trying to give more information to the buyer, right? So if it's just a guess, that's wrong. Yes, it still needs to be disclosed, but we're going to disclose what we do know. You know, there's a spot that feels soft in the floor in the kitchen in the northwest corner or near the dishwasher. You know, never had it checked out, but that's a disclosure, right? Versus someone saying, I think there's dry rot or foundational issues. They're disclosing what they know, unless they've had someone out or even multiple people out that have said things that are different, right? Do they have to disclose all of that? Absolutely. If they have any reports, estimates, inspections, they have to share that. And in fact, versus having them re-explain that issue on this document or the seller property questionnaire, I will often have them say, you know, give a small explanation, say, see attached, and attach those documents. There's no point in opening the seller up to liability or, you know, stressing them out with having to try to remember every detail of something that's really complex, right? I'll give you an example. I had a seller whose wife, you know, she had dementia. She, in the middle of the night, turned on the second story, a bathroom sink. It flooded, it caused mold, it caused issues. He made an insurance claim. It was covered, but it was all a big undertaking. Well, instead of having him say everything that was done, because he probably wasn't even aware, we disclosed basically what I just told you and said, see attached insurance claim as well as all, you know, receipts, scope of work, everything that we have on it, as well as contact information for the insurance adjuster, you know, explaining it all, right? Nothing better than the documentation that's already there. Also, we have limited space to write on the transfer disclosure statement and SPQ. If that's the case and you need more space, we are instructed to attach an additional page to the TDS and indicate that there is an attached page with the full explanation or remainder of the explanation. And I'll tell you how I sort of organize that so that it's clearer. We cannot leave spaces blank on these documents either. There are some really fucking stupid questions in these documents that shouldn't require an explanation. Like, are there sprinklers on the property? If you check yes, anything you check yes to on these questions needs to have an explanation. And there are often several questions for one explanation line. So let's say I have A, B, C, and D, and sprinkler question is C. On my explanation section, I will say C. There are sprinklers on the property. Secondary question, if there are sprinklers on the property, are they automatic? Yes. Sprinklers are C2. Sprinklers are automatic. Why is this important? Well, to protect everyone from liability, but also if you have an agent like me representing the buyer, I see a yes and I don't see an explanation, especially when it's something harmless like that stupid question, I'm going to hold it. And if my buyer has a problem or needs more time or a reason to cancel for any reason, I'm going to slap it back at you. And I'm going to have 5 additional days because you're going to have to revise it. And I just got my buyer out of jail for free and there's nothing you can do about it. And your seller is not going to be happy when you explain why that happened. Right? So do yourself a favor, no blanks. As a buyer's agent, you know, if it's minor and you share with your client and they're okay with it, maybe you hold on to this and you do nothing with it unless you need to. But obviously, if it's something that we do need to know, which is most things, you're going to need to kick it back, and ethically, you'll need to kick it back as soon as you know to give your buyer time to investigate and or inspect. Okay.
So to be redundant, whatever.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, plain and simple rule. If you check yes anywhere here, there must be a corresponding explanation, no matter how self-explanatory that question may be. Some of them are not, some of them are. Okay. All right. So very important on the transfer disclosure statement, the date is very important. Why? Because the seller can only be liable, at least for what they're disclosing on this document, as to their knowledge as of the date this document was completed. So you might print these out ahead of time, but really the date that's on here needs to be the date that they complete this document, okay? So be careful about that. I oftentimes will leave this blank and have the sellers write it in, okay? Section I should never be left blank. Oh, this is an uncompleted copy, yay, just checking myself. Should never be left blank, okay? It's talking about the transfer disclosure statement and its coordination with other documents or disclosure documents, okay? And you have three options here. Inspection reports completed pursuant to the contract or sale or receipt for deposit. So this means that anything that was negotiated in the residential purchase agreement as a report that is required. Typically, we try to avoid this. Buyers should have whatever reports they like and inspections they like during their investigation contingency. They can hire whoever they want and they can be a little more confident that the information they're receiving is unbiased because they hired an inspector themselves. There are things like the city builder report or natural hazard zone disclosure report, which is required in the entire state. Okay, so one of these is going to be checked. No matter what, whether or not you've written them in, there are going to be reports completed pursuant to the contract of sale. Because at a bare minimum, natural hazard zone disclosure report is required in the entire state. These documents only apply to our state. Okay, oops. Okay. All right. So another place that gets missed often is this section right here where it indicates on the document if the seller is occupying in the property or not. This is important, right? Because it tells the buyer, oh, you know, they live here, they should know, right? Or they don't, they might not know, I might need to inspect more carefully, but also to indicate there's a certain level of responsibility and knowledge you would assume someone has if they live in the property, right? So this probably would be heavily weighed into factor if there was any kind of legal action for at least even a claim to a failure to disclose item, right? You would expect that the seller would know that their neighbor's dog barks incessantly 24/7 if they lived in the property, and you can prove that that dog lived there prior to that home going on the market, right? But if they didn't, they might not know that. So why would they think to disclose it? So a court or a judge might very heavily, a mediator might weigh heavily into that singular question as to, was this truly, you know, concealment, a failure to disclose? Or was it something that could happen realistically and not have any, you know, real intent by the homeowner to, you know, choose not to disclose to the buyer? Would it be reasonable for them to miss it if they're at full capacity? All right, section A, the subject property has the items checked below. This is talking about all of the equipment that might be present in the home. All right, not all of it is. Sometimes the terminology is unknown to your clients. Even if the seller is wrong, if they don't know what a sump pump is, are they liable? Is that a bad thing? No, if they truly have no idea what one is, and they truly have no idea that there is one or is not one at their house, and they incorrectly report that, they are not liable. A seller is only liable for what they do know or could share with any reasonable certainty and or concern, right? They should not say a sump pump. Again, if they don't know it's a sump pump, they could be like, I don't know what that is, but I think it's in relation to drainage. I know we had some additional drainage put in here. So you know what? We can say something like that in the explanation section or other, you know, not sure if there's a sump pump. We did have some additional drainage added. Something like that. If you're not sure, just offer up what you think could be helpful, what you do know, right? For the seller. Down here in this section, exhaust fans. Almost all my sellers are like, I don't have any exhaust fans. Well, this is one of the examples of when I stop them and I say, well, most bathrooms and or kitchens have an exhaust fan, not all. Maybe you have one in there. Most of them at that point are like, oh yeah, we do. Great. So they can say in kitchen and bathroom. 220-volt wiring. Well, I'm a real estate agent and I know there's a difference between voltage and what it can handle. But what I know if my apartment has that in there? No, I wouldn't. I mean, I can probably guess my old apartment, the power, you know, it would trip the breakers if I ran a blow dryer and dishwasher and washing machine at the same time. My current one does not, but I still don't know. So it's okay to say unknown, but it cannot be blank. And it should not say NA or no. If you don't know the answer is no, or if you don't know that it doesn't apply, unknown. And unknown is a perfectly acceptable answer. It is not acceptable to say unknown when you know something. You must share what you do know or what you do see, notice. No conjecture though. Fireplaces, whether or not there's a gas starter, roofs, type, age, it's okay to say approximately. If you're unsure, you know, you can be vague or general. Are there, to the best of your seller's knowledge, any of the above that are not in operating condition? No, you don't need to enter anything here or have them write anything here. If yes, yes. And so in section A, these are not very clearly defined, but you can use the exact terminology of whatever's here, write it into this line, remember an additional page if you need more space, and say range, you know, dash, and then explain what the issue is. Right. Page 2. I hate this question because first it asks if there are any defects or malfunctions in any of the following. All of my sellers just want to say no. They don't want anything to be wrong with their house. I'm like, no, no, no. You need to read all of this and then answer yes or no, and then describe. Okay. Again, attach additional sheets if necessary. Then we go into the more clearly defined questions in section C, and it asks very specific questions. And again, sometimes my clients are like, I don't know what that means. And they're really trying to figure it out. And I'm like, hey, if you don't know what it means, that's okay. We can say no because you truly don't know what it means. A lot of times I'm not even sure. I think I know a little bit more now, at least about most of them. Right? Do you think your client knows if there's, you know, asbestos, formaldehyde, contaminated soil? Probably not, or else they wouldn't be living in that house. They probably wouldn't be sitting there doing the disclosures with me, right? But could there be? There could be. We don't know. No. Yes. Well, it's probably a big problem. So again, a really good reason that you as the agent want to complete these first. Maybe you cannot sell the home even if you wanted to. Maybe you no longer want to risk your time and money trying to with a big issue unless the seller is willing to resolve it or change their price or something like that. Sometimes issues are so big, the city won't allow transfer of the property until the issue's been rectified and certified in some way by some, official government agency. Features of the property shared in common with adjoining landowners, such as walls, fences, and driveways. Do you think your clients know about this all the time? They don't. They may. Sometimes they'll know about it, but they have no idea whose responsibility the maintenance is of something. Maybe there's an agreement, maybe there never has been. That's okay, you just share all of that, right? And you say exactly that. I don't know. I'm not sure. I know that there is a fence on somewhere in between the property line of my neighbor to the west and my property. But as to who is responsible or whose property line it's actually on, that is unknown. We've generally worked it out. You know, it doesn't have to be technical or formal language. It just has to be honest and forthcoming. All right, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but I want you to read this because it does ask about everything you guys are asking about: square footage, permits, remodeling, this, that. It asks about all of that. Okay. I'm going to go over a couple. like this one. Remember I told you about those stupid self-explanatory questions you still have to give an explanation for? Section 12, CC&Rs or other deed restrictions or obligations. Every condominium has CC&Rs, but you have to say yes. And then down here, 12, there are CC&Rs. If you want to explain further, HOA has CC&Rs, but there's a few questions. Is there a homeowners association, right? Common areas. These are all very self-explanatory, but make sure they're answered. Talks about potential or pending special assessments or dues increases, talks about potential or ongoing litigation for single family or condos. All of that needs to be disclosed, right? Because it can at some future date affect the buyer, and whether it does or not, even if it's undecided, they need to be aware of that information so that they can make a choice for themselves as to whether or not they want to continue with the sale. Or if there's some negotiation you can make that makes them comfortable with assuming that risk. Right. Section 3 here has to do with the other document we discussed, our document, our agent visual inspection disclosure. Okay. And we say either see attached, which I'd really like for you to have. I'd really like for you to have your Avid to attach this TDS, but that might not be the case. Okay. You would say probably Avid to follow. Agent notes no items for disclosure should never, ever, ever be anywhere, because I can guarantee you there is at least one smudge on paint from some child at an open house sticking their thumb on the wall, or a crack in pavement somewhere. And Avid's about the exterior of a home as well. There is something to disclose. Okay, so I don't even know why this is an option. Even if there is nothing to disclose, that should be written on your agent visual inspection disclosure. On a rare occasion, I'll have new construction and there'll be a bedroom or two that I cannot find a flaw with. I am really happy when that happens, and I write nothing to disclose. So sellers sign it, agents sign it. This is also, guys, an acknowledgement that you've actually read the seller's responses here, because is it arguable to say I did my job diligently and with reasonable efficacy if I didn't bother to read important information that would drastically affect the outcome of transaction if I handle it one way or another, or advise a seller to do so? What about if I represent the buyer? I give this to them but don't read it, and there's something really important in there. Is it reasonable to say, oh, I gave it to them, they signed that they read it and received it? No, it's not. It is your job to read it, and even if I don't understand it, point it out and say, hey, buyers, I don't know what this means, but it doesn't sound great. Shall we send some questions to the listing agent for the sellers to get more information? Let me check with should we check with the general contractor to see maybe we could have an inspection in relation to this? 100%. It is not my job to know, but it's certainly my job to at least try to look out for the things that could be of importance to anyone in the transaction, my client or another. What if I'm representing the buyer, or sorry, what if I'm representing the seller, but I happen to overhear the buyer state something that is incorrect based upon what I know to be true in the seller disclosures? Is it my job to correct that and make it known? 100%. You owe an honest and fair transaction to all parties. Okay. So read these. Okay, seller property questionnaire, very similar. Some of the questions are, kind of cover a little bit of the same stuff. Exactly same instructions as far as yes and no and explanations. All right. When I sign seller disclosures, I tend to leave these two documents until the very end so that my sellers don't see this fat stack and think all of them are going to be this difficult or time consuming. And when I do it, I have at least one dad joke to kind of break it up. So section 6B is asking basically if the property's been contaminated by methamphetamine and meth lab. And so I ask my clients, have you guys been Breaking Bad? Dumb joke, but at least it's like, it just breaks it up. Also, I think it's very important, and this is a fantastic example. Section 6A, within the last 3 years, has there been a death of an occupant upon the property upon the property? Note to seller, the manner of death may be a material fact to the buyer and should be disclosed, except for a death by HIV or AIDS. Okay, so we have the obligation to protect certain private health information, right? It may be fair to, and encouraged if the occupant died on the property of natural causes. That's probably something you want to say, and it's worth saying the little bit of extra, right? How about, right, it says 3 years here. How about if there was a murder or a suicide on the property 10 years ago and the seller or the agent, the listing agent know about it? Do you think that should be disclosed? Yeah, 100%. No, 3 is required. But if the death is of a violent or unnatural nature, that's considered a material fact that could certainly, particularly in certain cultures, affect material value or desirability.
Never cleaned up.
No, the Nicole Simpson house, that's going to be disclosed in perpetuity. I actually sold it. It's been sold since. My boss at the time sold it, not me. I worked on it, I should say. Yeah, perpetuity, because it affects value, and in some cultures, desirability entirely. Okay, so that is really great example for you to use.
Suicide is there too?
Yep. I think religious beliefs really are affected by that. But honestly, hey, I live alone, right? I'm sensitive. I stay up late at night. I mean, I might still buy a place where someone was murdered or committed suicide, but if it was between that, place and another place I liked almost as much, that might be a deciding factor for me. So clearly, that's an example of desirability.
But if we don't know.
If we don't know, we can't, there's nothing for us to disclose. We don't know. But if you do know, you must. So I'm going to go through, again, read all of these, okay? Nothing blank. You need more space, you attach things. If you have reports or information that already say it, say see attached and actually attach those documents to this disclosure. There are on both of these in different spots. Blanket questions, okay? 18C. Any past or present known material facts or other significant items affecting the value or desirability of the property not otherwise disclosed to the buyer. Okay, and not just this question, but all of them, even if it has been remedied or repaired, it still needs to be disclosed. Okay. So that's all there. So I'm going to go ahead and just briefly scroll through the next few documents so I can give you a basic explanation of them. So residential earthquake risk disclosure statement is required by the state. It asks a bunch of stuff that is really technical, unless you're like a structural engineer, foundation specialist, at least a contractor, you probably don't even know what most of it means. So if your client's reading it and they're like, what is this? Well, you have options. Yes, no, doesn't apply, don't know. If you don't know, don't know. It should never be anything else. If it's questionable, I'm not sure, don't know, right? Are the exterior tall foundation walls braced? What is that? Oh, it doesn't apply. No, you don't know. You don't know. Statewide buyer and seller advisory, big, long, scary advisory, basically telling buyer and seller what their responsibilities are, all the things they should check out, kind of goes above and beyond. It has some pretty outlandish inspections in there. But as an agent, read it all. Talk to other real estate professionals, right? We should not be limiting the inspections that our clients have. Obviously, there's kind of an industry standard for what's normal, but at the end of the day, your buyer can inspect anything they want with anyone that is qualified or unqualified, no matter what you or the other agent think. And they can cancel a transaction for any reason, right? As long as they have contingency protection in relation to that reason. I like to, when my buyers are like, and I can cancel anytime I want. I'm like, no, not anytime you want, as long as you have a valid contingency left. Okay, well, what does that mean? I'm like, well, if you have an investigation contingency, we walk into the backyard while you're there and a butterfly lands on you and you don't like bugs, you can cancel the deal as long as you have that contingency. Right? You can. You don't like the look of the neighbors. Well, you probably shouldn't say that, but you say, I've decided the neighborhood's not quite right for me. Seller rights and duties, a seller has to allow a buyer to inspect, all of that. So definitely read this. It's a very important document. Some of it doesn't apply and it's a lot of it is 100% overkill. But that's not up to us to decide. If you want further recommendations about inspections that should be ordered and recommended to your clients, at a bare minimum, please watch my inspections and negotiations class. Okay, come on. And you're gonna have clients that read stuff. If you don't know what all of this says, even if it doesn't apply, you don't look like you know what you're doing, do you? So yeah, very important you read this. All right, market conditions advisory. It just talks about offering price, basically stuff that buyers and or sellers might offer or ask for, particularly in competitive situations and the risks involved with that. Right, it doesn't necessarily apply. Water conserving plumbing fixtures and carbon monoxide detector notice. Those are required for all state transfer. Required by the state for all sales. And oftentimes the appraiser wants to see them in before they'll release an appraisal. So it could cause a loan delay. So if you are a listing agent and seller, you want to go get a retrofitter in there, even if it's not City of LA and a certificate of compliance is not required, because it is still required by the state. And there's no one really there to enforce it unless the appraiser calls it out. But your seller is signing all these documents. So if they're saying, yeah, I know about the law and I know it has to be compliant, even if I, as the agent and the seller, don't understand what that compliance is, does the seller have liability if the buyer has a claim of loss or injury that arises out of one of these things? Absolutely. So you should hire a retrofitter anyhow. And it will avoid any potential problem with an appraiser who should be calling these things out. They don't always. Okay, water heater smoke detector. It's a lot of repetitive stuff. Lead-based paint. All right. So this is a great example. There's more than one disclosure that is only required if a property is built before or after a certain date. Okay, this is one of them. Why? Well, lead-based paint was very common until 1978. And then it was removed from the market, at least in our country, or at least our state. I shouldn't say it could be the country, I don't know. But it was removed from the California, lead-based paint was removed from California in 1978. So it's possible that lead-based paint went on walls afterwards if people had old paint, but very unlikely, or not as likely. And no matter what anyone knows, I'm sorry, a home that's 80 years old, there's probably lead-based paint underneath there. It's probably under so many layers you'll never know. Most people do not check or test for it. Some do. It's rare. Does your seller have to check? No. If they're not aware of it, it's totally fine. If the house was built after 1978, do you need this document? No. And the other agent might ask you for it. And you can explain to them, oh, house was built after 1978. We don't need it. Right? It's just a slip of mind thing. Square footage, lot size disclosure. Square footage is the most common, commonly misreported item, particularly one that there are legal disputes over. So we have a disclosure about it. Fire hardening and defensible space disclosure and addendum. This document's new and it's required. However, it needs to be carefully completed, and you can only complete it accurately if you have the natural hazard zone disclosure report, because there's only additional action or requirements needed to close a sale if the property is located in a high severity fire hazard zone. And where can we get this information accurately? You really shouldn't take it from any place other than natural hazard zone disclosure report, which until this document came around, wasn't usually ordered until after we opened escrow. So if it would be really advantageous for you to take care of these things and know this stuff before you open escrow, you think you might want to rethink ordering a natural hazard zone disclosure report prior to opening escrow? Yes, you probably should if you have a listing. You can usually get that document same day as well. So it's a pretty quick turnaround, and escrow can help you order it. Seller pays for it typically. So if it is in a high fire severity zone, I personally have not had an escrow where I represent the seller in this instance, but there's secondary inspections that I think the fire department makes, and they may issue corrective items. And I don't think they have to be done prior to the sale closing, but I think there's a deadline, and I think the new owner has to assume those requirements. But again, I haven't personally dealt with it. I'm sure these things change. I want you to be aware of it. I want you to have that inspection so you can get the right people out to tell you what to do so that there's not a problem or a cost or something that causes cancellation or delay in close, or your client to be angry with you. Okay. All right. Now look, it's got a whole, was this edited recently? Yeah, look, this was edited 3 months ago. This is new, but it's already been edited. Probably because people like me are like, huh? How do I know? What do I need to do? Who do I go to? In fact, yeah, I'm not going to go into my side story, but yeah, there's a lot of information now that wasn't there before. So read it. And if you figure it out before I teach this class next, share with me so that, you know, I have a better idea of what I'm looking at. Okay, so those are the state required disclosures that are found on zip forms. Okay, different brokerages require different documents. Some of these are required by the state. These are all created and provided by the state, but every brokerage, including ours, has different requirements of which ones we must have. And they oftentimes make changes to that. So refer to the checklist in KW command that I'm going to show you after I show you our brokerage created disclosures. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing here. And I am going to pull those up. Again, these should be located on, like, I think they're on KWBH virtual, actually, the same website that you access these classes on Zoom. I think there's a header that says helpful links, and I'm pretty sure someone told me there is a link to the KWBH disclosures. There's also disclosures from the brokerage in relation to leases. I don't know if those are located in the same place, but I'm always pissed off because it's always late at night and I can never find them. So at least now maybe I have a place to look. All right, let me do our screen share here. Okay, can everyone at home see the Keller Williams Beverly Hills disclosure regarding online or wire funds transfers? Not you, of course you can see it. People at home? Maybe nobody's at home watching anymore.
No,
Yeah.
I'm watching.
You can see it.
All right,
I can see it.
great. Thank you. Okay, so this disclosure is it mirrors a disclosure that accompanies all of our contracts, be it listing or purchase agreement. So I'm not going to go over it. Like I said, the brokerage creates stuff. A lot of times it doesn't apply, or it basically mirrors disclosures we already have, but it maybe has language that the attorneys protecting our brokerage are more comfortable with or think is more encompassing to better protect the company and ourselves as agents. Again, it is your responsibility to read this and understand it and be able to answer the questions of your client, or at least refer them to the information that will explain things to them. Obviously, other than reading the pretty self-explanatory language here, if they have more legal questions, we're not legal professionals. We do have to refer them to a real estate attorney. Okay. all brokerages are required to, whether or not you use their affiliated services, disclose to buyers and sellers, the public, anyone working with any agent at the brokerage, any companies that they have any sort of financial interest in. So, sorry, our office or our parent umbrella company has ownership and clear mark title. And we know we have our in-house Cannon Hills closing escrow department. That's Pele, right? So we have to disclose this to clients, whether or not the clients are going to end up using these services. Okay. Our mortgage company, Keller Mortgage, right? So this might not apply at all, but it may.
Mortgage company, Movement and Keller.
Hi. Then we have a Keller Williams Realty Addendum. Again, may not apply, waiver inspections. So if a buyer decides not to have inspections, we need to put in writing that it's against our advice what we, that they should. There's actually an optional CAR form, a zip form for that. It's called, at least it was, BIA. No, sorry, buyer inspection waiver, BIW or BWI, buyer inspection waiver. If you search in zip forms in the search box, the keyword box, waiver or inspections, you'll find it. So this is just more language saying, hey, we advise you not to waive your inspections, but if you do, here's what could happen. And we are not liable. The brokerage is not liable. So again, may not apply. Permits. This is very, very informative, by the way, for you guys to look at. So you can look at, the potential issues that may or may not be super relevant, but at least so you have them somewhere in your mind. So if you come across them, I need to stop and ask someone about this and explore this a little further so I can better advise my clients and take the actions I need to take. Homeowners insurance, property is in a super high fire severity zone, insurance probably going to cost more. If the previous homeowners had a bunch of homeowners claims for whatever reason, insurance might be hard to get or more expensive, right? So read all of these. Views can change, right? Because someone next door might be legally allowed to build that blocks your view, that kind of stuff. Okay, so this is a big long one, and I'm going to show you, like, for instance, Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, hillside ordinance. Well, would that apply to my listing or my buyer sale in Culver City? No, but it's in here. This is that all encompassing disclosure. Basically, I call it the save your ass KW disclosure. Okay, so my clients are like, what are you talking about? Universal Studios expansion. And they live on the west side. That's not happening there, right? But I also learned stuff from reading this. Some of it's outdated, but I learned about some of the things going on or that could affect value in areas I wasn't super familiar with or I haven't done a sale in a while. So it's very informative. Read about it, do some more research on it if you want to know more. You can become an expert in that area. You could even find business opportunities because of that, right? You might get a few listings. What if you, approach homeowners in some phase of some, area where, they're not going to be allowed to do this or that anymore after the first of the year. Well, maybe you want to sell now while your property is still worth more. There could be advantageous things, not just protection things, for you to arm potential clients with information, which might result in business for you. And at least solidify your position as an authority and a real estate professional with those people for, just relational purposes, referral business. So when you work with at least our in-house transaction coordinator, Brian Chung, he sends links to the buyer's agent, okay, and your sellers to this homeowner's guide to environmental hazards and earthquake safety. It's big, it's fat, it's long. Just because you have this receipt doesn't mean you took care of sending that report over. So get that link, make sure it is a part of your disclosure package and it's sent out. Just having this receipt for delivery of it to the client is not good enough.
Which report is that?
It's not a report, it's a state created guide to environmental hazards and earthquake safety with gas shutoff valve update, which includes the federal lead booklet and toxic mold update. just what I wanted to learn about. I just did all that with my license renewal. They want me to know an awful lot about toxic substances for, being clearly told I'm not an inspector and not liable for knowing if something I'm not trained to know about exists. New duct sealing requirements. This has to do with HVAC. I don't think anyone knows much about it other than people who are putting in new HVAC. All right, disclosure for the city of Los Angeles, seismic gas shutoff valve ordinance and ultra low flow toilet retrofit ordinance. Remember, I told you, state has certain retrofit requirements, which means upgrading a safety issue that is legal until a sale because it's grandfathered in as what, up to code at the time the property was built. Okay, but if it's sold, that's their safe check mechanism. We know that it's been upgraded, and not everything has to be. But the city has decided that some things are not optional because they're so important. And the city of LA has that automatic gas shutoff valve and low flow toilet retrofit ordinance, in addition to things like the carbon monoxide and the fire, the smoke alarm and the water heater strapping that the state already requires. So this goes a little bit further into an explanation of that. People always get really concerned about this ultra low flow toilet retrofit. It's actually water devices now. I think this disclosure is even pretty outdated. It's not just toilets. Everything's supposed to be low flow. No retrofitter I've hired in the last 3 years has ever mentioned anything about this to me. I don't think they actually check anymore. It was causing, they're supposed to. So when my clients ask me about that, I share that with them, but I'm like, ultimately, it's not up to us. That's why we hire the contractor that does retrofitting certificates. We can only hire a licensed contractor that has, well, we can hire any contractor, but the services that we use, they actually have a special permission or designation from the city specifically to create the certificate of compliance. So what better way to not worry about it and take liability off ourselves than to do it exactly as we're told to? Not our problem. We hired the professional. He certified that it was in compliance. How would we know any different? So don't worry about that. And we can take care of it ahead of time. So if you do have to do anything, we can be prepared as to what and what that will cost you. All right. Investment information advisory, obviously, property value can change. A lot of things outside of our control. So people who want to come and sue you because you sold them a house where you estimated, that they could make money if they did some significant work to it. Well, they can't sue you if, the market tanks or they put in, a fire station next door, and that obviously hurts all future potential value, or if the city rezones something, right? So that's what this is about. Addendum B, agent's inspection disclosure statement. That's about the AVID that we've discussed at length already, so you know what that is. Insurance verification disclosure, just like the questions in TDS and SBQ, KW has a separate question for it. And so the seller indicates whether or not they've had insurance claims, and if they have, what they were and when. Square footage and lot size advisory. Again, just to cover your ass stuff. This is the most commonly litigated information that may be inaccurate, purposefully or not, more often than not, in any real estate transaction. And is that it? Yeah, okay, so that's it. Real quick, I'm going to show you the KW command section where you can find these checklists, because if you look at one of the printed ones or like electronic versions of it posted anywhere, it is not up to date and you'll be missing important things. Okay. So KW command. You sign in. You will have already needed to know how to create a contact, because you need a contact in order to create what's called an opportunity, which is where you input the information about your listing or buyer sale and upload documents to the office, as well as where you submit for your commissions. So granted, particularly in the mentorship program, if you've done the things I told you you need to do and the bare minimums that you need to know in order to get paid, which we should all want, right? You should be able to access opportunities. Try putting a dummy transaction into opportunities so you can check this out and so you can study this checklist. So you can get familiar with these documents, okay? Once you set up a transaction in opportunities, if it's a listing, you'll put in the associated listing docs. I'm just looking at some, yeah, that's not gonna have anything. Let's do this one. And I think I forgot screen share. Sorry, guys. There you go. Okay. So I'm in an opportunity, right? I put all the information in, I set up my transaction. Once I do, and I indicate if it's a buyer sale or a listing. If it's a listing, it's going to tell me what documents I need at the time of listing. It'll be over in the side. If it's a buyer sale, like the example I'm showing you, there'll be different sections, right? Obviously, consultation has no required documents, but there might be important documents you want. So if the buyer gives you a pre-qualification letter, gives you a proof of funds, perhaps you want to upload it here, but it's not required. However, once you write an offer and it's accepted, 100% you will need to upload documents under contract. And it indicates here to you on the left-hand side if it's required or not, okay? It tells you what it is. It even tells you the acronym associated with that document. So if you type that acronym or the name of that document into zip forms, you can see what you're talking about. Some of these documents, even if this is a buyer sale, right? Some of these documents have nothing to do with me or my client, like the agency with seller. That's between the listing agent and the seller, but I still need to obtain a copy of it and upload it here. Sometimes you'll have multiple versions of something. So let's say I have 6 counter offers. If I need to custom add something, I can come to these 3 dots at the top. I can add document, and it walks me through trying to categorize what kind of document it is and then calling it something. So if I have 2 counter offers, if I have 4, I have 2 buyer counter offers, 2 seller counter offers, or multiple, and then singular counter offers. I'm going to type that in the name and indicate it so it's really clear. This is very helpful for you. It won't be required for the office other than providing it. But how can the office audit it and make sure everything's correct and safe for you and your client unless it's indicated to them? They don't know the specifics of your transaction, right? They could not know that there is an existence of an addendum to counteroffer number 2. They could not know that because maybe something was mislabeled or someone didn't read everything. So be careful and be clear, not just for yourself, but for the brokerage. Optional confirmation of agency. Well, I don't need to confirm agency unless there's a discrepancy, right? That's why it's optional. Okay, same thing with counteroffers. They're not actually optional if they exist, but they may not exist because you may just have an offer that's accepted. Addendums may or may not exist. Conditional short sale addendum. Why is this conditional? Well, it only applies, and not all of these conditional and optional are labeled correctly. It only applies if it's even a short, like if it's a short sale, right? So take a look at these. So like this trust advisory, this is not optional, this is conditional. If there's a trust involved, there needs to be a trust advisory, right? Mislabeled. But you should still be able to determine whether or not it's required. How do you know if a trust advisory is required or probate? Well, is a seller or buyer in a trust? And even if you don't know, you can go to your mentor, myself, Mike Rosales, and ask, hey, how do I know if this is required? And I can say, well, what's the seller's vesting? How's your buyer? How'd they write the offer? What name? Okay, so pretty self-explanatory. Once you upload all of these, you will submit them to the office. If you're missing anything, you may or may not get a kind of snarky email from someone in the office, often micro results, sometimes someone else, asking you for the documents that you're missing or need to be corrected or signed. And then once you're closed, escrow is going to provide you a bunch of documents that we don't initiate. So after the under contract, when all of the documents you and the other agent originate are uploaded, when you close, you'll get what's called the closing package. Oftentimes items will be missing. So it'll be your job to go to the escrow company and say, hey, I need a copy of the escrow instructions. And there's some information here that you probably don't know. You got escrow instructions likely in the beginning of your transaction. The office wants assigned escrow instructions. They don't want the blank ones. Signed by both buyer and seller, because escrow instructions are not valid unless signed by all parties, right? So you may be missing some of these things. So you'll have to look through them and ask escrow. And look at the documents before you know if you're done, like NHD receipt, natural hazard zone disclosure report. Guess what? Buyers, sellers, and both agents have to sign. So if you have the clients and yours, but not the other agents, you need to reach out to escrow and or the other agent to get that. Okay, but if that's not clear, you could submit a blank one here or one that your client signed and think that you're good. You're not, so ask questions, take a look. Better to have more than less. Okay. All right, any questions, guys, about disclosures? I'm tired. I'm sure you're tired of listening to me. Trying to do more thorough classes before I leave, so bear with me. And if you, where am I not? Paris? Well, next week? No, the week after, the 14th. I'll be back October 4th. Yeah, I go to France and or Italy every year, at least once. Yeah, I'm only flying into Paris, so I'm going to the French Riviera. I'm going to Cannes. I'll have a day trip in Monaco, Saint-Tropez, Marseille, and then Ibiza. Je m'appelle Christen.
Am I invited?
Pardon? Excusez. Oh, I always shop, yeah. How about anyone at home? Any questions?
I was just wondering, am I invited?
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, probably not. I like to travel alone, so I can do whatever I want. So people can go wherever they want, but it doesn't mean that it's gonna affect my plans. And then the Ibiza part's actually a wedding. However, if you're around, hit me up on WhatsApp. I'm sure I'll want another glass of wine and we can meet up at some point. All right, guys. Have a fantastic week. I do. I'm sorry, what's that?
Yeah, just. How are you? Where are you?
I go to Europe every year, not, yeah. I usually go to